Good afternoon. Let's go ahead and begin our webinar. Welcome to the webinar today on effective communication and its impact on behavioral symptoms in people with dementia, facilitated by the National Alzheimer's and Dementia Resource Center, which consists of our team at RTI International. I'm Sari Schumann with the Resource Center team, and I will be moderating our webinar this afternoon. The purpose of these webinars is to provide helpful, current, and applicable information for ADSSP and ADI-SSS grant projects and others in the Aging Network. Please note the webinar today is being recorded and the PowerPoint presentation will be sent soon after the webinar. We will allow time for questions through the webinar's chat feature at the conclusion of the presentation. If you have a question during or after the presentations, please enter your questions into the chat feature of the webinar. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Erin Long from the Administration on Aging, Administration for Community Living to provide a brief welcome.
Hi, everyone. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us for our webinar on effective communication and the impact on behavioral symptoms. We're very excited to have Cathy Piersol and Judy Berry to give us great perspective on this very important issue. I look forward to learning with you on this, and I'll turn it back to Sari so we can get rolling.
Great. Thank you so much, Erin. Today we'll hear from Dr. Cathy Piersol, who is an associate professor in the Department of Occupational Therapy and clinical director of Jefferson Elder Care at Thomas Jefferson University. And we'll also hear from Judy Berry, who is the founder of Dementia Specialist Consulting and the Lakeview Ranch model of specialized dementia care. She is also the past owner of Lakeview Ranch. We welcome and thank them for their presentations today. And first we will hear from Dr. Piersol. Dr. Piersol, we're ready.
Hey, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here. Okay. So my talk this afternoon is going to focus on general dementia care models that help to explain why challenging behavioral symptoms occur, and specifically how communication strategies can minimize those challenging behaviors and ultimately promote positive behavior and quality of life for both the person with dementia and the caregiver. I find that understanding why behaviors occurs is powerful for caregivers and helps to facilitate their readiness and their ability to implement communication and other strategies. So I'm going to start by presenting a few dementia models that help to explain why these symptoms occur, and the foundation to these models is understanding the triggers of these challenging behaviors, which is grounded in a person-environment interaction, that the environment plays a significant role, as you'll see in all of the models I'm going to describe, in what we see happening with the person with dementia. So within that environment, in this case, in this talk, really the person, the caregiver, a friend, family member, and others are part of the person's social environment. Having dementia can cause difficulties in how the person with dementia talks to and understands people. Caregivers are challenged and must really remember to communicate still with the person with dementia, even if they cannot see or understand what the person's responses are or what they're trying to communicate. The disease is responsible for these difficulties, which I find is often a challenge for caregivers to understand, especially when the person with dementia is viewed as always having been this way. For example, a daughter who says, "My mom never listened to me, and she's still not listening to me now." If that is the case, it's often sometimes hard for a caregiver to tease out the fact that the reason why mom's not listening now or is not able to respond or follow directions is really a result of the dementia and the changes that are going on as a result. The person with dementia, as we know, is not able to change the way he or she communicates. However, the good news really is that we can change. Caregivers, people that interact with the person with dementia can change. And we can change the ways that we communicate and how we interact with the person, which can really minimize some of the challenging behaviors, the difficulties, that the person with dementia is experiencing, improve their interactions and participation, and lessen the stress of both the person with dementia and the caregiver. The first model that I wanted to share is called the Competence Environmental Press Model. It was developed many moons ago, but still has such viability today by Lawton and Nahimo. This model looks at this complex interaction between the capacity of the person with dementia, and in this case, in highlighting communication issues, so the capacity of the person with dementia to understand language, to follow directions, and to make their needs known, the interaction between that and the press of the environment. So how the person that they're communicating with is approaching them, what the person's nonverbal communication is, their body language, and their verbal approaches. So this model highlights that when the press is high, so on the left-hand side, you can see that graphic, when the environmental press is high, so when the physical and social environments present a greater demand, a lot of people talking at one time, a caregiver saying many words, many directions at one time, having music going while the caregiver is speaking to the person with dementia. That's a high press. That lowers the person's ability to understand, to react, and can lead to these types of maladaptive behaviors or challenging behaviors. However, if we can reduce the environmental press, so looking at the graphic on the right-hand side, if we can reduce that, if we can simplify the way that we communicate and change the physical environment to be more conducive to someone understanding and following gentle or simple instructions or cues within the environment, then that leads to an improved competency and participation in the person with dementia. So this model really highlights that connection between person and environment. And what we ultimately want to try to do is to provide that just right fit between the person's capacities and the environmental press, if you will, then that's what results in positive behaviors and a better quality of life, again, for both the person with dementia and the... I think I'm the one that changed it to October. Model, some of you may be familiar with, is the need-driven behavior model. It also is referred to as the need-driven dementia compromised behavior model, although I think more recently it's need-driven behavior model, by Algas and her colleagues. And this model has been used a lot to help to explain the meaning behind behavior, oftentimes in nursing homes. That's where a lot of the literature comes from, is in a nursing home environment. This model provides a way to think about the meaning behind a person's behavior, because with dementia, as you know, the ability to communicate your needs is compromised. Behavior oftentimes, the way in which the person with dementia is reacting to a situation or to the environment, is the way in which they are trying to help us understand as caregivers what their needs are or what they're reacting to. Essentially, all behavior that we see has meaning, and if there is negative behavior, challenging behavior, it indicates that there is an unmet need, that the person with dementia has an unmet need that we have to try to figure out so we can meet that need and ultimately improve their ability to participate and reduce the potential for negative behaviors. So in this model, we have background factors that impact on the current factors in the person's current experience, and that affects the behavior. So, for example, if someone has arthritis, in the knee, for example, they might be experiencing pain. That pain is considered a current life factor. The arthritis is considered the background factor. And then because of that, if I ask this person to stand up to walk with me or try to help them stand or try to get into the shower, there could be a resistive type of behavior or agitation or a pushing away or I'm not doing that. And in reality, what's happening there is that this background factor, arthritis, is causing pain, which is the current factor and is causing the behavior. So this person could be identified as someone who's resisting and is not agreeing to what I'm asking her to do, when in reality the foundation to that behavior is pain. And if we can uncover that information, we're going to be able to do a lot more and resolve the issue and promote a better participation in the person with dementia. So in addition to conditions like arthritis, background factors include the disease itself, so the arthritis disease or the dementia diagnosis, as that it goes through stages, that becomes more of an impact on how they're reacting. It includes sensory changes like vision and hearing impairment, and then personality, how the person was before, the types of things they enjoyed, and the types of things that might have caused them frustration are also part of the background factors that we need to consider. Current factors, some of which are treatable, like a urinary tract infection, pain can be treated, obviously, nutritional deficiencies can be dealt with. There are also current factors like hunger and thirst, need to use the bathroom, dehydration, and of course there are emotional needs. Fear, insecurity, and confusion can also be current factors that are interfering and causing the behaviors that we see. And then the environment, the social environment specifically, is a current factor. So this model looks at these factors, and by trying to understand both the background factors and the current factors and taking them into account, trying to decode them, if you will, and determine what a person is trying to communicate, that can help us to link those communications with behaviors and ultimately address and resolve and help the person move beyond the behavior and reduce and minimize that. The next model that helps us understand why behaviors are lowered stress threshold model, and this was developed by Hall and Buckwalter. And again, you see many similar factors here in terms of environment, in terms of the impact that the environment has over time on the person with dementia. This model talks about comfort zones. And we all of us, every day have a comfort zone, and depending on what's going on around us in our environment, or how tired we are, how stressed we are, our ability to function can be compromised. So all of us have a comfort zone beyond which we can become over or understimulated. So when you look at the arrow at the bottom of this graph where it says stage of dementia, on the left it says normal. That's no cognitive impairment, no deficits. We all fall into that category, but you can see that we have limits to our comfort zone. There are situations that would cause us to be under or overstimulated. Now, as you can see during the stages of dementia from early through to late stages, the comfort zone shrinks over time. So what does that mean? That means there's more likelihood that a person is going to be under or overstimulated, which there then can be a trigger for the behaviors that we see. In addition, a person's comfort zone can shrink during the course of a day. It can be, a person can be more able to tolerate what's going around them in the early part of the day, for example, and not be able to tolerate things in the later part of the day. We see that oftentimes as being referred to as sundowning. So that comfort zone, although we see it progress through the stages of dementia, absolutely, I like to think about this as well when I'm working with someone over the course of a day and think that time of. So as the comfort zone shrinks, whether it's over the course of the disease or over the course of a day, the person with dementia is unable to really accurately process what is going on around them in the environment. And that includes what a caregiver is saying and what their nonverbal behaviors are, how they're being interpreted by the person with dementia. So a lot of talk, extraneous commands, external noise going around as you're trying to support someone to do an activity, that's going to be less tolerated as the disease progresses, and the person is going to need to have a quieter environment, is going to need less talk, maybe more physical cues. So caregivers monitoring the person's level of stimulation and responses can really help to try to keep that person within a comfort zone where it's less likely that those reactions will occur either from over or under stimulation. Now, the triadic model is the last model I'm going to share with you this afternoon, and the triadic model was developed by Gitlin and Corcoran really as a conceptual model for a caregiver intervention called the Environmental Skill Building Program, which is now called the Skills. And this model you'll see draws from concepts from the models that I just discussed, the Competence Environmental Press, Needs-Driven model, and the Progressively Lowered Stress Threshold model. In this model, you can see that there's 3 domains, the person with dementia, the environment, and the caregiver, all of which contribute to the behavior which we posit in the middle of those 3 domains. So if we look at the person with dementia, reinforcing what I've discussed through these other models, there are attributes about the person with dementia that are treatable factors, but also things that are more related to their internal state. So we can treat COPD, for example, or diabetes. We can treat a UTI, if we can, a urinary tract infection, if we determine that that is a problem. We can have an impact on what someone is eating, potentially what they're drinking. We can provide medication for pain, for depression. We can potentially have an impact. Noise, okay. And then there are part of the person with dementia, which is more important and sometimes more challenging to figure out, are the internal states.
All guests have been muted.
The fear, confusion, disorientation, a sense of loss of control, all of those things contribute to what we see a person doing. And so the person with dementia brings all of those characteristics to the behavior that we see. The next would be the environment, which includes the factors that you would imagine in relationship to stimulation or understimulation. So clutter and noise may promote more overstimulation in the person with dementia. Too many people talking at one time within the environment, a complex environment with many objects, many items to have to interpret and understand. And then the environment can be, as we talked about in the previous model, under or overstimulating. And then we have to consider the caregiver. And whoever the caregiver is, we could also say this is the person who's interacting with the person with dementia. This person brings to the picture a communication style, whether it is getting frustrated and yelling or whether it's talking calmly and softly and slowly. the person, the caregiver or the person communicating can have too high expectations of the person with dementia. They expect them to know more than they do, to be able to interpret more than they do, to be able to function at a higher level. The caregiver is certainly stressed oftentimes with the responsibilities. They are trying to cope with their caregiving responsibilities and more than likely other life responsibilities. They may rush through activities. They may have difficulty reacting to the unpredictability of the person with dementia. And then, of course, caregivers themselves are dealing with and trying to handle their own health condition. So given these factors, we have, I wanted to share an example briefly where we have a person with dementia who gets agitated when asked repeatedly what he would like to eat for any meal. So he doesn't respond, and the caregiver keeps asking him what he would like to eat. Eventually, the person becomes upset and says no, and then he walks away. So here we have this behavior. He gets agitated, the caregiver is saying, I'm trying to give him his meal, he won't eat for me, and he walks away. So what could be contributing to this from these three domains? So the person with dementia may not understand what the caregiver is asking. The person with dementia may be uncomfortable within the room. Maybe it's too cold or it's too hot. It may be overstimulating, so she or he is not able to process the request. And maybe that person with dementia has some sort of pain or some sort of condition, medical condition, that is interfering with their ability to process the request or the activity. In terms of the environment, looking around the environment, is it noisy? There's other people in the room talking. There's too much activity going on within the room. The temperature of the room have an impact and may be causing that agitation. It's not that the person with dementia doesn't want to eat their meal, it's that they cannot process, they can't understand what they're being asked for various reasons, and that's why they're walking away. And so what role does the caregiver play in this? The caregiver, because they, not intentionally, but because they care about this person, is making sure that they're asking the question about what they want to eat, but it's more abstract. Saying, what do you want to eat, is a very abstract question. Saying, do you want chicken or fish, is much more concrete. So if asking an abstract question and the person doesn't understand it, that's going to be difficult, and that can cause someone to get upset and have a negative reaction. Presenting too many items at one time, saying too many words at one time, all these types of communications approaches, which are common, can be causing the reaction that we see in the person with dementia, and therefore become frustrating for both the person with dementia, who is doing their best, and the caregiver, who thinks they are really doing their best as well by trying to provide a meal or to meet a person's needs. So with all of these models, and you can see how they all interact with each other, but I like to think about and teach caregivers all of them, because each of them bring a specific aspect of understanding. And as I said earlier at the beginning, it's so important to understand why behaviors are occurring, and that's really powerful to uncover strategies. So all of these types of models help us to figure out what kinds of communication strategies specifically, and there are other types. We're focusing on communication this afternoon, which I always put at the utmost. The priority is looking at communication. How can we, what are some of the strategies that can be used to minimize some of these types of aggressive, resistive behaviors, or behaviors around apathy, not initiating, becoming upset, lashing out, wandering, all of those types of behaviors? What are some of the communication strategies that can minimize those behaviors, but also, on the flip side, promote the participation, promote the quality of life of the person with dementia. So these are just some basic strategies that result from thinking about the triggers, and Judy's going to go into more specifics in terms of her program, but I just wanted to highlight the importance of both communication with words and communication without words. So communication using words is when you say something, allowing the person time to understand. Count to 5, for example, before you repeat the question again or repeat the comment again. Using simple directions, leaving out all extraneous words rather than put on your shirt, Mom, put your arm in the sleeve, put on your shirt. Or rather than, we're going to go downstairs and eat breakfast, let's stand up, walk with me. So breaking things down to simple directions is so important. Being as concrete as possible and not abstract. Offering choice, but offering no more than 2 choices oftentimes is what we find works best. Avoid correcting and negative words. Avoid saying you didn't do that right, or avoid saying, remember I told you that already. And as much as possible within the realm of safety, of course, is to go along with the person's beliefs and not argue with them. If they believe that it is breakfast and it's really dinner time and they want eggs, go along with that and make eggs, and it's breakfast time. Going along and meeting their needs and meeting what they believe is happening at that moment is so important. And then looking at communication without words, using just a light touch to reassure if that's appropriate for the person, being aware of how you come across. Are you folding your arms in front of your body? Is your facial expression showing frustration? Moving slowly and calmly, allowing the person to understand first what you're directing them to do or what you're facilitating them to do. Sometimes using written instructions, depending on their ability, is something that can work nicely. And then when appropriate, expressing affection, letting someone know that they're doing a good job, that they look good, and providing that positive feedback can really have an impact on reducing the types of challenging behaviors that we face when working with people. And I'm going to end there. And I know my information will be also at the end of the presentation, and we'll have questions at the end of Judy's presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Piersol. We're going to move to Judy Berry's presentation at this time. Judy?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay, there it is. Hi, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to my part of the presentation. My presentation is a little bit different in that the model of care that I'm going to talk about that was developed at Lakeview Ranch over the last 16 years has been based solely on seeing the person with dementia differently, seeing that they're not gone. Well, I'm trying to make it go ahead. There we go. The Lakeview Ranch model of specialized dementia care was developed as a memorial to my mother, who had been kicked out of many different places for aggressive behavior. What I did, this model was created to focus on identifying and meeting the underlying individual emotional and spiritual needs of persons with dementia in addition to their physical needs. That's what I saw when my mother was in long-term care. Her emotional needs weren't being met. Everybody was really good at trying to take care of her and change her pants and feed her, but it wasn't addressing her and her actual needs. You need to learn the critical importance of proactive behavior management and with an attention to nonverbal communication. What we practiced with the Lakeview Ranch model was exactly that. It was proactive behavior management. We also focused on reducing use of psychotropic drugs. I watched my mother go through a roller coaster of for 7 years, with every time she was hospitalized, they would change her meds, or they'd up or take them away or whatever. And it just created, I knew nothing about psychotropic drugs and what they did until I watched that in my mother for 7 years, as she just went bouncing back and forth through different phases. And every time they'd change a med, sometimes it didn't work, sometimes it made things worse. A lot of times it changes the very behavior that they're trying to prevent. It makes it worse. The drugs are used for treatment of symptoms only, and not identifying the underlying need behind the behavior. Psychotropic drug use often alters a person's ability, and they want to communicate their needs, but it makes them almost impossible. They're snowed, and most caregivers cannot identify their emotional need. What we noticed with the Lakeview Ranch model was that we brought people in from hospitals who were severely over-medicated, and one of the first things we did with our registered nurses was to titrate those drugs back. And it was amazing to watch people, their real personality, come back when you eliminated these drugs. And many places are in fear of doing that because they're afraid they won't be able to manage the person if they're not drugged. That's the way it was with my mother. What I learned when I started the ranch, and what our vision was, is to change the way dementia care was delivered. Instead of just focusing on what places get surveyed on, we wanted to actually focus on emotions and feelings, because that I saw with my mother. I was constantly told that I was a family member in denial. I was a barbecued rib salesman. I knew nothing about health care, but my gut told me that there was more to this than just taking care of my mother's physical needs. When I started the ranch, we've had over 200 residents in 16 years that have been the people who nobody else wanted, who had overwhelming behavior issues or presentations, but it was all because they had feelings and emotions that weren't being looked at. What really the residents wanted was to know, I am still here. I still have the same emotions and feelings as you. Validate my feelings. What I really need is to have my feelings validated. I am still here, to be understood. That's not understanding that it's time to eat, or it's time to change my pants or go to the toilet. What needs to be understood is what they need emotionally. They need to be given choices. It's not about what you do for me. It's how you make me feel. Please allow me to experience a sense of control over my life. To have experiences that are stimulating and, that engage me, but with minimal stress. This picture is at one of our homes, and we had miniature animals. We were in a rural area, so we had miniature goats and donkeys and horses and things that came in the house all the time. This particular goat happened to be wearing a diaper, so she didn't do things all over the woman that was holding her. They want to experience pleasure, and pleasure is not about whether I have my pants changed on time. I mean, I'm not saying that you let people sit in their urine, but it's not the top thing on the list that is actually bothering them that's causing the behavior. A big thing that I learned, how our perception hinders our response as a caregiver. Oh, come on. Sorry. Preconceived ideas cloud our judgment. Have any of you ever thought about in your brain, your idea of what makes a person human? A lot of times it's whether we see them responding in a way that we recognize. And their humanness is never going away. Our expectations, how they should feel and act. Whose expectations are those? Those are ours. There is no reason why somebody should be considered a behavior issue because they act in a certain way that needs our attention. Our own feelings get in the way a lot of times. We take their responses personally. It's not about us, it's about them. And when they are saying things that are hurtful, it's just because they're so desperate to have someone understand that it's their emotions and their feelings, not whether whether all the physical things are taken care of. Our whole model with this whole thing, we understand that our staff are taught that any kind of dementia, their inhibitions are gone. So that's one of the first things that goes away. So people act differently. They swear when they've never sworn before. They do things that are different. They follow instincts when there's no inhibitions. And just like the sexual aggression on a lot of people's part, we had to teach our staff not to take that personally. That is not what it's about. It's just about the fact that if some woman leans over them, starts to take their clothes off or takes them to the bathroom to do cares, they're going to react. It's just normal. It's part of the normal stuff that all of us have inside. Communication is about feeling. As dementia progresses, that gets to be even more and more visible. I want to feel loved, respected, safe, and comfortable. I remember with my feelings. It's not about what I can and can't remember. It's about what I feel. We work hard on debunking the common myths. Now, everybody's heard these. I'm fading away. Whoa. I have somehow changed from who I was. That's so untrue. They don't change. They're still the same person you knew and loved. They may act different, but that's because their brain is damaged and they still need the same kinds of validation. I'm in the midst of the long goodbye. I got told that about my mother so many times, and I can tell you that till the day my mother passed away, I could communicate with her on an emotional level, look in her eyes, hold her hand. When I would walk in, she would just brighten up. She couldn't say my name. I didn't care. I knew she knew who I was. But then in minutes, tears would roll down her eyes or her face. And she'd just say, help me, because she was so drugged and, strapped in a jerry chair so she couldn't get up and walk around and get into trouble. And, everybody told me I was crazy that I saw these things in her. I'm a shell of who I used to be. That's, I have lost my soul. Why bother anyway? I won't remember. I'd like to point out this picture, though. This is a lady I have permission to use. Elsie was one of our residents. She's laying here actually on her deathbed. She was going through the process of dying. And one of our staff happened to be doing animal therapy in the other room and knew that Elsie had a special connection with one of our many horses. And so when she was done with the rest of the residents, she brought Coco in to see Elsie. And as you can, well, you maybe can't see it as well, but Elsie, when the horse got up close to her, I don't know if it was the smell or whether she just sensed it, but here she is 3 hours before dying, and she reaches up to grab this horse's muzzle and sat there and stroked it for 3 or 4 minutes. It was just amazing. They have heightened emotions once they're verbal communication. We need to recognize the emotions in people. We need to recognize the nonverbal for all these things that they have that are usually left unaddressed. And that's when behavior happens. Most people don't do it because they think that doesn't matter. Think about how it would feel to be stuck in your body and not be able to get somebody to know that you're really in there. One of the things that a lot of people miss is grief. We had a gentleman that died, and as part of our group, we had 15 residents in a house. When someone dies, no matter what stage that the other person's dementia is at, they know somebody's gone. It's, it's very discouraging to them when nobody even mentions it, or, we used to bring everybody together when someone died right away, and sometimes the family would come in too, and we'd say some prayers. We'd tell the residents, whether they could answer us back or not didn't matter. And then we celebrated the life of that person after a period of time after they were gone. Like this, he was a farmer, and we had a party to celebrate Bob's life. But it's important that you know all these things are happening with people with dementia, regardless of how much they say. Learning nonverbal communication, these things, pain, comfort, all these are things that you need to be able to recognize in people that can no longer communicate. All behavior is an attempt at communication. People don't just act out because of their brain damage. They have unmet needs. What people call sundowning is something that through our 16 years, we were able to eliminate. What we learned was sundowning is nothing more than a person's circadian rhythm. You find out what they did, where they were at certain times of the day, and then you understand that and you help that person through that frustration when they don't even know what it is they want. They just, in many instances, we did have a farmer that as soon as we got enough family history, he had a horrible sessions every day, like at 3:30 or 4 o'clock. And everybody was telling us, oh, he just has sundowning. Well, what we found out was that he was a farmer and he had milked cows. And so all we needed to do was go up to him and give him a hug prior to him getting all upset and say to him, your brother's milking the cows today. You don't have to worry. And just like that, his behavior went away. It's validating the feeling, even though he couldn't tell us that's what it was. Wandering is another thing that, they're not just wandering. They're looking for something. And it's up to us as caregivers to figure out what that is, or at least to validate to them that you understand there's something they need and that you're trying to help figure it out. And as far as physical aggression, my mother had lots of it. What I learned is prevention is key. You cannot well, I shouldn't say cannot, but most times if a person has escalated so bad that they're swinging at people and, hitting staff, hitting other residents, screaming and yelling, it's pretty hard to settle that down without medication. And the whole idea of the Lakeview Ranch model of care, and this was for both dementia and dementia-related behavior and for comorbid stuff, was to be proactive. Staff are taught to watch closely. Somebody is always in the area where there's a group of people. And you need to recognize when their mood changes or when something starts to happen and step in before anything horrible happens. Recognize how your own beliefs and perceptions affect your ability to see the feeling behind all nonverbal communication. If you don't believe they're there, how much effort are you going to put into trying to understand what's going on? Acknowledge your own limitations. Get to know each person as an individual. Go slowly, give choices, and be flexible. When you stop and you think about all of this in caregiving with somebody with dementia, how many times does it really matter? It's more us trying to bring back that person we thought we knew. I had a lady that was trained my staff, but also talked about she had a baby in diapers or a young child when her husband had dementia and was in diapers. And she'd saved some money and bought herself a new set of pots and pans that had the nonstick coating on them. And she told us this story, and it just made so much sense. She said she had saved for it for a while. She finally got it. She went off to do something or take care of the baby. She comes back, and here's her husband in the kitchen with Brillo pads scraping the nonstick coating off of her pans. And he turns around, holds the pan up, which has nothing on it anymore, and just grins because he felt he did such a great thing. And she said, her first thing was to just holler at him, what did you do to my pans? And she said she stepped back and had to bring that to mind. Does this really matter in the scope of things? In summary, it's all about changing your perception, validating the person within. That person is there till the day they die. I had many, many opportunities through the 16 years with the ranch to have people that haven't spoken for a year or so say things like, I love you, thanks for caring. Or I had a gentleman, and this happened several times, on their deathbed. His twin sister was taking care of him, not taking care of him, but coming to visit him at our place once a week. And when he was passing away, the staff called me. I went in and I gave her a big hug. And I said, Ruby, I know this is hard for you. And I want you to know how much we appreciated you sharing your brother with us. And she goes, oh, it doesn't matter. She says, he hasn't been there for 2 years anyway. And I knew I wasn't. They were 94. I knew I wasn't going to change her mind. So I walked up to her husband, and who was laying in the bed, and he was going through the process already. And I rubbed his hands until I could feel him starting to grasp my hand. Very little, but it was there. So I pulled the covers back. I was rubbing his hands, rubbing his arms, and out of nowhere, he fluttered his eyes. Didn't open them, but he fluttered his eyes, and he said, thanks for not giving up. I love you. And Ruby, his sister, saw this. She was standing away from the bed, and tears welled up in her eyes, and she walked up to him. And I said to her, talk to him. It doesn't matter that you think he's not there. Talk to him. Tell him all about how you feel. And when he passed away a couple hours later, she came out and gave me the biggest hug. And she said, you just gave me the biggest gift, because all this time I thought he was gone, and here he was just stuck and behind the veil. So that really completes my presentation. I hope I didn't go too far over, but
Thank you so much. We're going to move to questions so we can get a few in before the hour, and then we'll stay on for a few extra minutes just to answer any questions that come in. So please feel free now, everyone who's participating, to enter your questions into the chat feature of the webinar. And thank you, while we're waiting for questions to line up, thank you, Judy and Cathy, for your presentations. And I'm getting lots of comments in that they were valuable and worthwhile. So thank you to both of you. And any questions can come in through the chat feature now. You'll also notice in the closing notes, you can contact me or Erin Long from the Administration for Community Living, and with any questions or feedback. And if you have questions for either of the presenters, you can see their information in the closing notes as well. So the first question, it probably is appropriate for either of you. It's asking how one might work with a nursing home to understand these models. What are some steps that you could take?
I do start. This is Cathy, if you want me to start, and then Judy probably has hands-on experience with that. But I find that it takes the time to bring the information to the nursing home and to explain. I think Judy reinforced much of the models through all of her examples and the approach that she uses in her facility, and that it's a matter of knowledge and understanding. It's a matter of demonstrating the outcomes that you can get by utilizing these models and strategies. And it's working together as a team and acknowledging a collaborative relationship, that we're in this together, and that the ultimate goal is quality of life of the person with dementia, and enabling them to, as Judy's saying, be the person that they are and enable their best ability and best experience. So I find that collaboration, but now I take the approach that knowledge, teaching and helping them to understand what's going on is how I get in and develop that aha moment, that rapport.
And this is Judy. I think Cathy's, got an excellent perception too about what needs to be done. As I actually did it with my mother when she was in nursing homes, I couldn't get anybody to take a look at emotional needs, but she died in '96, so that was a number of years ago. And after I started the ranch as a memorial to her, and we practiced this idea of looking at the emotional needs and understanding that they are the cause of the behavior, unmet emotional needs. Once in a while, somebody will act out if they have wet pants or, they're hungry. But that's usually pretty obvious. And what I saw getting missed all the time was looking at the emotional needs. And when I brought it up to places, they would say to me, I was a family member in denial, and her behavior was a part of her damaged brain. And I just couldn't buy that. I was a barbecued rib salesman, so I knew nothing about healthcare. But this whole concept of understanding that that person is not gone, and that they're in there and they have the same feelings and emotions that they've always had. And, I really think that there needs to be lots more training, but in addition to the training in nursing homes, I think there has to be buy-in from the administrators, because it takes more staff to do this. And if you're not willing to put on the staff, it's okay. I mean, you can't expect that it's going to happen.
Right. Thank you, Judy. There are a few questions that came in related to staff. You answered that you really do need those staffing ratios. And there's also another question here, and Judy, it was for you. The question is, how are you going to reach families? How do you help them accept that their loved one is still there? What are some steps that you might take?
Well, and now I have, I'm 71 and I have sold the ranch last year. And the one thing that I feel that I can still do is I'm doing consulting and family coaching, because I can share with people from a personal perspective, and I can also show them how to communicate with their loved one and how to see those nonverbal cues, and to, so they get to actually see it so they believe it, because it's pretty hard to go against a lot of the thinking that is tied to the myths. And, but we did it for 16 years, and all these people that we took that had been kicked out of many, many places and deemed no longer fit for anywhere, we got rid of the behavior by 93% just by doing that, just by paying attention to the emotions. But I am doing family counseling and consulting, and I just want to share what I know. And I think the family members have to be ready to reach out and ask for help. There's lots of training out there.
Great, thank you. And are there any steps that either of you have seen with the behavioral models where they've helped family members understand what's going on, especially when family members are in denial, or someone even said that they're creating maybe a toxic environment for their loved one?
Mm-hmm. This is Cathy. The question is what to do about that, or how to help family understand, I guess, is the question really. That is a challenge. My work is in homes with caregivers and individuals with dementia, and in the home environment you see all of what Judy's describing. Actually, you see in the home as well. And I'm harping on the education and the skills that are required. I never expect a caregiver to know when I first encounter them these models or these approaches. I wouldn't necessarily call them a model with a family caregiver, but I feel as though education is power, and I have had and seen many positive experiences by stepping back a minute and helping a caregiver where they are able to understand, because every caregiver is on a different level of ability to understand, on a level of readiness to begin to implement things differently, to look at the person, as Judy's saying, from an emotional standpoint. That is a skill, and I truly believe it demands training, education. So I think that's the starting point. But what's most important working with families is to meet them where they are. How do you do that? There's many ways, trying to understand. There's different approaches that can be taken, but to understand where the caregiver is. We cannot just come to a caregiver and say, look, your mother has dementia and here's some strategies you need to do. We have to step back and say, where are they? How understanding are they? What do they understand about dementia? What do they understand about their family member? And I think that's where you have to start. That's the key in my experience and through the research that we have done over the years, is that you have to meet the caregiver where they are, and that's the starting point.
Great.
And whoops, go ahead.
I was going to say thank you so much. After you respond, Judy will close things out.
Okay. I just wanted to agree with Cathy. You have to meet family members where they are, but you also have to validate their feelings and make them not, so that they don't have to feel guilty. It's reaching out is hard to do, and accepting somebody else's suggestions. It has to be kind of presented so that they understand what it is that and that they know that you validate them where they are.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much to both of you again for your presentations and to all the participants for attending today. If you have questions that we are unable to answer, you can send those to me via email or to the presenters directly, and we will try and get them answered for you. The presentation slides will be sent to all participants in the next few days. And if you have any other questions, please always don't hesitate to contact me. My email information is in the closing notes. So with that, we'll close things out, and a big final thank you to Dr. Piersol and Judy Berry for your presentations today. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.